You're listening to the Swap Society podcast, and I'm your host, Nicole Robertson. I interview thought leaders and change makers who are working to create a more sustainable and equitable world through fashion, art, and activism. Join us for a dose of climate optimism as we envision a brighter future. Hey everyone, welcome to the Swap Society podcast. Today I'm so excited to be talking with the founder and CEO of Bubuleh, Jordan Starr. Hey Jordan, welcome to the show.
Hey Nicole, thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited to chat with you.
So I love what you're doing with your brand and I can't wait to hear more about it. Tell us about Bubuleh and what inspired you to start your brand.
Yeah, so I started Bubuleh just about 2 years ago. It's our 2-year anniversary next month. And the brand is really inspired by the strength, beauty, and resilience of the Jewish diaspora and specifically older generations. Most of the inspiration for the brand is my grandparents and just older generations of my family and just in general in the Jewish diaspora community. And I started it during COVID really as a way to celebrate my grandparents in a time where we couldn't really interact and see them and to kind of get in touch with my roots in a way that felt important to me at a time where we lost so much during COVID. And so I've been doing it, for the past couple of years, which has been really interesting.
Oh, and I almost forgot to ask, where are you talking to us from today and where are you from originally?
Yeah, so right now I'm in Boston, where I'm from originally. Usually I'm based in LA, but I'm in Boston for a few months. And so that's where I'm talking to you from now because I'm here spending some time with family.
I love it. Well, I learned about your brand and I thought, oh my God, I love it. I love all of these Yiddish phrases. I was really excited. But then because of just who I am and I care so much about sustainability and ethics and fashion, the first thing I did was look on your website to see if you had anything about sustaination and ethics. And you did. And I was so excited. So tell us how that works with your brand. What are the steps that you're taking to be a sustainable and ethical fashion brand?
Yeah, I'd love to. So for me, when I started the brand, it was sort of a non-negotiable that it was as sustainable as possible because Bubuleh is like very much an extension of myself. Like it's very personal. And for me, like I'm, been vegetarian since I was 13. I've been vegan for over 10 years. I'm like very concerned with the environment. And a lot of my ache will really come from an perspective of like just loving animals. Like that's my approach. A lot of my sort of foundation for why I care so much about sustainability is because I care so much about animals and sharing the environment with, everyone around us, whether it's people or animals. And so it was really non-negotiable that when I started the brand, it wouldn't have a negative impact on the things I care about, animals, the environment, and I would really mitigate the harm to the environment because fashion, as you know, is so like detrimental, right? And so it's so detrimental to the environment in so many ways and to people, right? There's so many issues with human rights. There's so many issues with mass production, with waste. I mean, the list goes on, as you know. And so when I was starting Bubuleh, I really was kind of teaching myself, and I still am, about like the best ways to incorporate sustainability into the brand, and they're constantly evolving. In the beginning, I explored different ideas like do we use recycled materials? What materials do we use that we feel would be most sustainable and authentic to the brand? How do we make sure the partners we're working with aren't greenwashing us, like they actually have things that they're enforcing? So a lot of times we really adhere to international certifications like RAP, which is like has an oversight committee and audits, which we can't perform as a small business, but there's an international body that does, and fair trade certifications, things like that. So we rely on those as a small business to really make sure that the people we're working with align with our values. And I think for sustainability, there's a lot of like every part of the business, I really incorporate sustainability into it, from like the production to the packaging even, which is like plastic free. And I try to be as recyclable and using recycled materials as possible. And so one of the ways in terms of the actual designs that we incorporate sustainability is I feel like I wanted to create pieces and brands that really were about slow fashion, not about churning out pieces based on seasonal trends, seasonal styles, but really creating pieces that I'll love as much today as I will in 2 years, that will last, material wise, as much today as they will in 2 years, and just design wise and aesthetically, right? So I want people to buy things that will last for years versus, having to continually buy every season. And so we use really high quality, really sturdy materials. Like I really have a high emphasis on stitching and the quality because I want everything to last. And I don't want to use, design something that is, going to be like a kitschy gift and someone will be like, oh, that's cute, but like will get thrown away. I design things that are like, oh, I can have this in my closet for years. Like this is great. And then, because it's organic cotton stuff, most of our stuff, decomposes, of course. We do a lot of embroidery. The embroidery is cotton versus polyester. For the most part, there's a couple of pieces that have recycled polyester. And so that's like another one of the ways we incorporate sustainability.
I love it. I love that you're even thinking about it down to, what is the thread made out of for the stitching of the embroidery. That's so great. So is everything embroidered and not screen printed?
So pretty much everything is embroidered, and there's some stuff that we do direct to garment printing. Like we do DTG printing, which is a little bit more environmentally friendly than screen printing. Though, I know there are just some different opinions. Like from the research I've looked at, DTG printing is a little bit more environmentally friendly, but for the most part, we use embroidery, which is aesthetically a big part of the brand because, like I said, it's really a retro-inspired brand, and embroidery to me feels more aligned with that kind of grandma, new age grandma feel, like new meets old feel. Like I kind of say it's like brand's like nice Jewish boy meets old Jewish grandma, and a lot of like kind of my aesthetic. So like I'll go into my grandma's closet and be like, Nana, this is so chic. Like I need to, and it's like so much about the stitching is so beautiful, the embroidery is so beautiful. So I try to, kind of replicate that.
Do you feel that your grandmother and just the Jewish ancestors, the female Jewish ancestors in your family were really into fashion and style? Was that a little bit about like part of your family?
So I don't think that my family was particularly into fashion and style. I do know my mom's mom, who I never met because she died of breast cancer before I was born, was a seamstress. And so obviously she had that background. And within like Jewish diaspora communities, like manufacturing was definitely a big thing when people immigrated here. So I have like great grandparents when they immigrated here with nothing were like in the Thai manufacturing industries, right? Like it was a big thing for immigrant workers. So there's that background within manufacturing, but not necessarily fashion or style. I think it's been sort of, the younger generation that's looking at the older generation style and really seeing it for maybe more than what those generations saw it as. Like I look at their style and I'm like, this means so much. And they're like, what are you talking about? It's just a cute dress. I'm like, no, but it's more than a cute dress. Like it represents like your roots, where you came from, where we all come from. Like I think I am almost projecting a deeper meaning onto the fashion of the people who came before me that even they consider for the fashion they're wearing. But for me, I find it, really cool. My grandma's like, it's just a sweater. And I'm like, no, but Nana, it's like a very cool sweater that you've had since the 60s. Like, that's so cool. Like, I love that. But she'd be like, yeah, no, my mom gave this to me, I'm like, there's so much history in the clothes that we wear, especially durable clothes that last, right? How much history do we lose when we're producing garments and pieces that are thrown away in 6 months? Like, it doesn't hold up that, like, I like things that have heritage kind of imbued in the fibers of the brand, right? And you can only do that with pieces that last. And so I think when I look at like the clothing of my family, it's not necessarily about the style, more about like there's a story to it. And I try to kind of, I'm trying to kind of continue or progress that story.
For me, I have some memories of family fashion that are just like embedded into me forever. Like
Oh yeah,
great
what?
great my great great aunt Sarah. I remember I was little and I went to go have lunch with her one day, and she was very old. I mean, she was my great grandmother's sister.
Okay.
And she was wearing a Kelly green leather mini skirt to lunch. And I just
Okay.
remember that and just thinking like, wow, she's so cool. Like she's older
Right.
and she still wants to dress up. And I think
Mhm.
that my great grandmother wasn't as stylish as that. Her sister
Okay.
was, but I had, I saw that,
Yeah. Yeah.
and my grandmother, I always thought she was really stylish. She was always, you know, trying to, I think I always thought she was like very modern,
Okay. Yeah.
she actually didn't like things that were old fashioned too much.
Okay.
She was always like modernizing, but I always thought
Cool.
that was kind of cool. But
Yeah.
it's interesting how fashion and families can have such an impact, I think, on just who we
Mhm.
become, even if it's in a very subtle way.
Yeah, absolutely, because like what we wear is like one of the first things that you can see about someone, right? And so, not to be necessarily superficial, but what we wear represents us. Like it represents what we
Mhm.
care about, right? Like where we're shopping from, like everything about what we're wearing kind of has a story, right? So it does impact us. It does impact how we grow up and what values we have, um,
Yeah.
for sure.
So let's talk about some of the phrases that are on your clothes. I know
Mhm.
that not everybody listening necessarily even knows what Bubuleh means or what or has any access to Yiddish. So talk about some of the phrases that you use and what they mean and why you chose those phrases or words.
For sure. So for anyone listening who like doesn't know Bubula, so Bubula is like a Yiddish term it's a term of endearment that kind of roughly translates to like sweetheart. So like for people, for mostly Ashkenazi Jews, because it's Yiddish, it's like more Eastern European descent. Um, it's like something that grandparents say to their grandkids a lot, like "Hey Bubula," and it's like something you say to kids, something you say to grandkids. A lot of people, sort of my age, say it to people all around them as like a term of endearment. And so a lot of the clothing brand is just trying to kind of physically embody what that word means. It's nostalgic, it's retro, it's resilient, it's Jewish, but not shalom Jewish. It's accessible, right? Like, everybody in New York, for example, knows what bubble is just because there's such a high Yiddish influence, right? Like, it's like it's a word that people use all across, different backgrounds. And so that's what bubble means. And so we incorporate different Yiddish phrases like we have organic cotton, kiss my tuchus shorts, tuchus like butt, right? And that's like embroidered and like have some other things that have some Yiddish words. I do stray from using Yiddish words too highly on our clothing because one of the reasons I started Bupala is if you go on Etsy, for example, there's like tons and tons of products, like print on demand products or like, you know, uh, kind of fast fashion products that have just like a kitschy Yiddish word on the front, right? And like totally, respect the value of that. Like, that's how people kind of keep Yiddish going a lot of the time. But I was seeing like a lot of Yiddish phrases on clothing can be kind of kitschy and not fashionable, like not stylish. They don't last. They're more gifts. So I kind of use Yiddish sparingly, and when I do, it's like maybe more subtle. It's a little bit more like for aesthetic, not for aesthetic reasons. It's more aesthetically conscious, I guess. So like for Kiss My Tuchus shorts, it's not like it's plastered on them. It's like embroidered subtly on the, right bottom, right? So it's like an accent that you can see, but it's not too out there. For Bubula too, like it's kind of if you know, if not, you just think it's a cute word, then that's like, featured on a lot of our clothes. We actually had for Pride, one of our best-selling products is I did Fagala tees, and Fagala in Yiddish is like gay, and it hasn't necessarily had the best connotation. So it was really an act of reclaiming that word for Pride for a lot of people from backgrounds like mine who were like, oh, I've never heard Fagala used positively, and I wanted to hear people use it positively as like a proud Fagala. So like that's something we've done and we incorporate into clothing. Um, and there's other ways like I'd say even if we're not printing necessarily Yiddish words on phrases, a lot of the Yiddish phrases kind of guide the design work. So like a phrase I really take into consideration and I actually want to do a whole line for is like Zaftig. And Zaftig in Yiddish is like a plus size curvy woman. And it's like very positive. Like there's no English equivalent for like a very positive curvy woman. Like kind of like thick, I guess, is like maybe, like a somewhat equivalent, but it's like a very positive word. And I'm like, well, we have this, Yiddish word that's about like that's so body positive, and that incorporate kind of the spirit of that into the brand. Like we just extended our fall styles up to 4XL for most of the pieces. And like, it doesn't say Zoptig or anything, but it's sort of, you know, like the Yiddish words are kind of guiding a lot of the designs and guiding a lot of what we do.
I love that. I love that you're also thinking about plus sizes. There are so many brands that don't do that.
Mhm.
So it's really cool that you're focusing on that as well. So did you grow up speaking Yiddish or do you just have just Yiddish phrases kind of floating around in your vernacular?
Yeah, we're like Yiddish phrases. So like my grandpa Abba spoke Yiddish, but never really spoke it like fully around us. It was just like bits and phrases. Like most people, I think, are around kind of like this generation grew up like with the bubulas and like tuchis and like different phrases, but not like fully speaking Yiddish. And a lot of that's because obviously like my grandparents' generation and their parents' generation like actively avoided speaking Yiddish in the US. And so because they didn't want to like necessarily out themselves as like Jewish, like because a lot of us like changed our names. Like my family wasn't originally Star, so it's like change our name, stop, drop the language that a lot of us spoke, and this generation is kind of like really getting back in touch with that. There's this big reclamation of Yiddish, of like, hey, I never learned this language that I really would have loved to because this is part of my heritage. Like now I'm trying to learn it. So there's actually a Washington Post article we were featured in recently, which is about the resurgence of Yiddish. And Duolingo launched a Yiddish course this year as one of its most popular courses. And like more people are taking that course than there are Yiddish speakers in the world. I mean, it's like there's so many people across different backgrounds, like who are taking Yiddish, who are learning Yiddish, who are doing online classes, and are just like, oh, this is a big part of my identity I never got to really know so much, besides for sort of the little phrases here and there. And so I'm, not ever going to be like a Yiddish speaker. Like there's no way. Like there's just no way. But I think the language and what it represents is something I really love and admire and connect to.
I was actually just chatting with my grandmother the other day, who she is almost 90. And so she was born in 1933, but she also does not speak Yiddish. I mean, obviously she has a lot of phrases and words that are a part of everything, but her grandparents moved here from Russia and Austria, and
yeah.
And I know that my great grandparents spoke it, but they didn't teach it to my grandmother. I mean, assimilation was really a big thing. My family is from Chicago, primarily. But she actually mentioned that the other day. We were talking about languages, and she just out of nowhere, it was just kind of funny timing. She just said, "Yeah, I never really learned Yiddish," and I was just kind of like, ah.
It's like such a bummer because I think a lot of people like would have really loved to know it. Like it's something that like a lot of like people feel like they missed out on. Like I feel like I missed out on it. I would have loved to have spoken Yiddish or been more like well versed in Yiddish. I just know phrases here and there like most people, and that's I think kind of a bummer. But just the fact that even those little phrases have survived is so wild to me. Like because like Yiddish has literally survived against all odds, like as have just Jews, to be honest, like, we've survived against all odds. And so just the fact that like Bubble is a word that we still know and so many people know is just like a testament to the strength of like the people who came before us, I think. And I attribute that a lot to like the people who have kept kind of like us going, like grandparents, great grandparents, and they did what they had to do. And maybe it was dropping a language they felt safer. And then fortunately some of us can maybe pick that back up if we feel comfortable. And that's something that I'm feeling like I have a privilege to do now versus grandparents and great grandparents didn't have that.
Yeah, I mean, my grandmother, she grew up living in an apartment building next to a building that was restricted, which meant that Jews couldn't enter that property.
It's wild. I don't think people really realize how recent that is in history. Like that, like there's a lot of people I know when I will bring things up like that, like 30s, 40s, 50s, even like, restricted properties for Jews. Like people are like, what? Like that happens? And it's like, yeah, like, because like that happens.
Yeah. Yeah, it's crazy. And and if I get her talking about that, sometimes I just love to just talk about her past and her history and family stuff. I love history and I love learning about family history. And I feel like, my chances to have these conversations are not going to be forever, so I feel like lately I'm trying to have them more often, but she also has such a funny attitude about it where I think that my family was assimilating, but also had kind of like a feisty attitude about it, where she was like, well, if they don't want me there, then I don't want to be there. That was always like kind of like her attitude.
I love that. It reminds me of that one of my favorite quotes this year is like, if I'm too much, go find less. Like, and that feels like that attitude to me, which I love. Like, they don't want me, fine, I'll leave. Like, I love that.
Yeah. And I think that too, because I've been getting ready to talk to you, I've been thinking a lot about just Yiddish phrases in general and how they're a part of my life. And I remember I grew up in a neighborhood in a suburb of Chicago that was mostly Italian. It was like almost
Mhm.
everybody was Italian. There really weren't
Okay.
Jewish people. There was like one Jewish family in the whole school,
Okay.
I think. It was just like,
Wow.
and my family is mixed, and and I don't know, I was just kind of like do going about my life. But I remember one time I had a teacher that pointed out to me that there were words that were words that I used that most of the people at my school, for example, would have no idea what I was
Yeah.
talking about. And it kind
Yeah.
of blew my mind.
Yeah.
I wasn't really aware of it. And she said, and I just remember this clearly too. And she said, well, I mean, do you know what a nudge is? And I was like, of course I know what a nudge is. And
Yeah.
she was like, nobody else in this entire school knows what a nudge is. And I
Like,
was like,
it's like really
what?
wild. It's really wild. Like sometimes I like I use a lot of like Yiddish phrases like in my everyday life. And sometimes people will be like, what? And I'm like, I forget that not everybody like knows what that means. But for me, I just like will say it and not even realize not everyone knows what that means. Yeah.
Well, and I even the other day had a funny experience with my husband. My husband is not Jewish. Well, he did 23andMe. He's 2% Ashkenazi. but but anyway, but I we were watching White Lotus, the White
Oh,
Lotus. I don't
the
know if
new
you,
one?
yeah, the new one.
Oh yeah, I just watched it, the new episode for
Yeah.
a couple months ago. So good.
and and we had paused it for one moment, and I started saying like, well, clearly he's shipping someone else or whatever. And I don't know,
Yeah.
I don't know, that's just the word that seemed appropriate
Yeah.
in the
Like there's
circumstance.
that's the most accurate word to use. Like I know exactly what you're talking about. And I'm like, there's no better word to describe that situation.
My husband didn't know what that meant. I was like, wait a minute. We've been together since 2006
No.
and you've never heard me say shtup. And then I was like, I guess I don't use that a lot,
Yeah.
but there are some circumstances. And
Yeah,
I was
there were
like,
just it just requires it. There's some circumstances where it just requires it. I think like one of the cool things about Yiddish and like this is just about the language and culture in general is like one of the reasons that so many Yiddish words are so ingrained in society, like schmooze or like, shtup is one that a lot of people know, a lot of people don't. But like when you think about schlep or like,
schmuck.
like, yeah, like when you think about those things, they're just like a lot of words get to something. There's not really like an exact English equivalent for, like an equivalent in other language. Like it really is like a language of connection. And like that's a funny example to use language of connection and regarding like shtup, like right, like that's maybe a different example, but like it people be like I have to schlep this over here, and it's like what other thing would you use? Like that's the word like it just gets to very real everyday things, Yiddish as a language. And I think that's why it's so cool and why it's so like so many people know it regardless of their background.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think it's fun, and I think it's interesting just to even think about it. Yeah, like what are the words that we use, and why do we use them, and
Mhm.
what's the significance of that or whatever.
Yeah.
And like I said, like my family is very mixed, and
Mhm.
and I guess I also feel like, oh well, I want my kids to know that part of their ancestry is Jewish. Like I
Mhm.
feel like that's just important for them
Yeah.
to know, especially in this time of, and now we're
Yeah.
going to get I want to get a little serious, but
Mhm.
there's so much anti-Semitism right now. And I was talking to a cousin the other day, and she was like, it's always been there.
Yeah.
People are just getting more vocal about it, which is
Yeah.
a way to look at it, I suppose. But
Yeah.
I feel like it can kind of happen in these waves, right? Where it's like people feel emboldened to behave a certain way. I'm in
Yeah.
LA. I'm sure you saw the signs over the
Yeah.
405 and just
Yeah.
the craziness of that.
Insane.
Um, and so I think that, by framing that ancestry in a positive way,
Mhm.
and also in a proud way, right? And like,
Yeah.
oh, like we're from this, these like resilient, tough,
Mhm.
funny people.
Yeah, like we survived 3,000 years. Like we'll survive this. We'll survive this, and like we know how to. We're like survivors as a people. But this is definitely a challenging time. 100%. Like it's. I think in a lot of ways it's a really scary time. Um, and that's definitely something that I think about. Just it's something I think about a lot as a person and a lot as someone who's specifically running like a Jewish inspired brand. Um, is that it's a kind of a double-edged sword to be running a brand like we're doing and wearing clothes that have Yiddish, on them, like Bubuleh, in a time when there's so much happening. And it really is, I think recently I've been definitely feeling like I can't detach from what's happening from the conversations around anti-Semitism, what's happening, just given the position I'm in as like a Jewish brand, and that's what I care about. Um, it's really tough. Like it's like a really, because you're right, it goes in waves, and sometimes you think like, oh, are we past, this anti-Semitic wave? Like a couple of years ago, we had a really bad one. A lot of my friends were taking like their mimosas down, and people didn't feel comfortable wearing like Jewish star necklaces for a while. And that was around when I started Bobala, and then it felt like it kind of got better, and then obviously it's just so much worse, and it's just like you just feel like, oh, is this ever going to end? Like, are we, like it can be really tough. It can be really exhausting. I feel like for me, it one of the reasons, going back to kind of the heritage and family and ancestry is like I think about one of the reasons I'm really personally vocal about what's going on and about anti-Semitism and all forms of hatred, but anti-Semitism, of course, as well. Is like when we think about what our families went through to come here with like nothing to escape anti-Semitism, just for it to pop up again, like badly here, like I think one of the biggest things we can do to respect the people who came before us is make sure that like conditions here don't resemble anything that they had to escape from. Because I think about like how traumatic it is for older people whose parents came from like from the Holocaust and just other. There's the Holocaust was just one of many persecutions in the region, in many regions against Jews that came here and felt safe, and now they're feeling unsafe again. I'm like, no, we need them to know they're protected and safe, and we all need to be standing up so they know that it was worth it to come here, right? Like they're not gonna have to be in fear of the same things they used to be in fear from, and that's something I think about a lot. Um, just to seek haven and refuge, and then have all those ideologies come back at you in your new place is just like horrifying. And I agree with what you said, or what someone said to you, which is it's always been there. Sometimes people feel more emboldened to talk about it publicly. They feel like there's no consequence. And when they feel like there's no consequence, it's important to show that there is, which is why what happened with Kanye and Adidas cutting that partnership is so important. There's so many other forms of anti-Jewish racism and anti-Semitism that need to be discussed, and we all need to be talking about, because I really believe like history doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme. And there are patterns happening right now that I think we all need to be aware we've seen before over thousands of years, and everybody throughout time has thought they were safe, and obviously that's not turned out to be true a lot of the time. And I'm not saying like we should be catastrophic or apocalyptic about things that are happening right now, but it is something that I think we all need to be paying attention to and calling out when we
Which
see it.
brings me to the next thing that I want to mention. I saw a video of your mom on your social talking
Yeah,
about this and talking about how you're donating a proceed of your sales to the ADL, the
yeah,
Anti-Defamation League. So I'd love for you to talk about that a little bit.
for sure. Yeah. So for like a little bit of context here also. So as a brand, I do direct to consumer, and I use really like ethical, handmade, eco-friendly products, which obviously have a price tag associated with them. But I also I want to be as accessible as possible. So I don't do wholesale because I try not to mark things up. If I do it direct, I can obviously bring the cost down to make it more accessible while still keeping the ethical standards and environmental standards that I want. But that being said, we really, as a small business, and with those ethical requirements in mind, don't really have the margins to donate up proceeds of our revenue yet. And that's something I ideally want in my brand, like 10% of our proceeds every month go to this. But just logistically, it doesn't work because because this, like clothing margins aren't great. It's part of it, right? Like it's not something people go into for the money, right? And so I've always felt like, I want to donate like, a percentage of, proceeds to the ADL or different organizations, but logistically hasn't been possible. But after the recent, Kanye, debacle and all that stuff, my mom, who's a coach and is amazing, was thinking about was feeling, like she wanted to do something, and has decided to match 18%, which is like obviously a symbolically Jewish number, high life, to support the ADL through the rest of the year. And that was sort of her way of, as a mom, sort of supporting me and my business and encouraging people to like shop Bubuleh, right? Which is like a very Jewish mom thing to do. So thank her. Thank you, mom. Um, and it was also like, her way of supporting the ADL at the same time. So yeah, we're matching 18% right now through the end of the year, which I'm really excited about.
That's amazing. That's so great. And that I love just hearing about that part of the story too. You mentioned earlier that, you were a vegetarian at a young age and you've been a vegan for a long time. Um, what other ways do you incorporate sustainability into your personal life outside of also what you're doing for your brand?
For sure. Yeah. So the brand is obviously a big part of it. Being vegan is a big part of it, but being a very like, being vegan for me, being plant-based is like an all-around consumer choice. Like I don't wear leather, I don't wear any animal products. The brand doesn't use any animal products, animal byproducts, anything like that. Um, and I think increasingly I've been more focused on like being more of a conscious consumer and to help sort of lower my environmental footprint. So like I'm way far from where I want to be or should be, which my sister reminds me of constantly because my sister is one of those people who doesn't buy firsthand anymore, buy only thrifts, only buy secondhand. It's like, don't produce anything new. When I'm like, I love that, but I also do produce new things. So like it would be great if they buy for us. Like I love that, Hannah, but like I do need to run a business too. Um, so like I'd like to get a little bit closer to that of using more secondhand and everyday from sort of clothes to just like everything I buy, right? Because there's so much stuff out there, right? Like if you go to Goodwill, you can find like so many good things. Like I love thrifting, right? Like clothes or otherwise, right? So I'm trying to incorporate just that's this sort of secondhand buying more into my life, and I'm trying to think, like I think really and I know the vegan, the vegan part isn't all encompassing, right? That's one facet of environmental consciousness. For me, a lot of the ways that environmental consciousness kind of shows up for me is around veganism, though. Like that's kind of the core pillar of my life of because it what we eat, what we consume is so much part of environmental pollution and land use and waste and animal ethics, against animal ethics and human rights. Like for me, that's the core pillar of my life that's kind of ties together a lot of the things I care about, like anti-violence, supporting humans, supporting animals, like things like that. So that's kind of like the big way it shows up. Um, but open to other ways. I'm gonna start swapping. I'm gonna start swapping because I love
Yay!
that. I love Swap Society, by the way. Like
Thank
love,
you.
love. And it's so unique that with the coins, like the
The swap
alternative,
coin. Yeah.
the swap coin. I love it. Like so clever. So I'm like things like that, like trying to incorporate more into my life, right? Because being vegan is a big thing, but it's not the only thing. So and that's something I'm increasingly conscious of.
It's such a major way, though, that people can really reduce their own environmental footprint. Is just
Yeah,
even if they don't go vegan, just by eating less animal
yeah,
products can be a major impact. Do you
absolutely.
have the Vegan Butcher, by the way, the cookbook from
I
that
do have
Australian
vegan.
guy?
Yeah, I do have the vegan butcher. I'm a horrible cook. My sister's a great cook. I'm horrible. Fortunately, I've lived in cities that have had really good vegan food. I just moved out of LA, and LA is the best vegan food ever. Like it's like a vegan paradise.
It really
Now I'm
is.
back in Boston, and I'm kind of adjusting to like, oh, I don't have vegan gourmet options everywhere I am now because it's not LA, and I was in San Francisco before that, and New York before that, and like moved around to a lot of vegan friendly cities. But for the most part, regardless of what city you're in, it's so much easier to be vegan or to change to substitute choices like once a week, twice a week, anywhere you are than it was 10 years ago. Like it's drastically different from when I first started being vegan. And I always say like as a business, as a consumer, like we vote with our choices every day. And, today's election day. So it's kind of ironic to, be talking about that. But every time you shop, you're voting, like you're voting with your wallet. Every time you sit down to eat and you're ordering something, you're voting with your wallet. And so I try to be really intentional of like where I, kind of use my money, where I spend my money, and making ethical choices at every step I have. So every time I sit down to eat, I consider that like, I can make a choice that's better for the environment or worse for the environment, better for animals, worse for animals. And so I just try to kind of weigh like my decisions every day to to kind of move towards ones that are more environmentally friendly, though I'm far from perfect. Still have a long way to go.
It's a process, right? It's a journey, not a destination. Isn't that the cliche? But I mean,
Yeah.
it's unrealistic for any one person to just be absolutely perfect at it. So I think
Yeah.
that any steps that people can take, even if they're little ones, that cumulatively can have great impact, and even just being more mindful in general.
Yeah, for sure. I think like, one of the things when I started a brand and when I started a clothing brand that I realized is there's so many complexities specifically to when it comes to being an eco-friendly clothing brand or just eco-friendly clothing that people don't realize because people are like, okay, so there's some people who are like, okay, don't use animal products and that's environmentally friendly and that's one part of it, but not the only part. Some people are like, you should be using recycled fabrics, but there's also issues with recycled fabrics, right? Like, you're still having plastic beads that fall off and drain into the ocean. The more that you recycle the plastic, you're having things that if it's recycled plastic, it's not as comfortable for your skin. So they're quicker to be thrown away and they don't actually decompose. Like there's so many buts, there's so many caveats, right? Like I think this is the way to go. I use organic long fiber cotton and but then certain times in the US like it has to be sprayed before it comes in. Like there's so many complexities. And so I think making environmentally friendly choices and ethical choices is just like kind of just have to do the best we can with the knowledge we have at the time and the options we have at the time. And because it's just like I learn things constantly where I'm like, oh, I could have done that in a more environmentally friendly way. I just didn't know it at that time. And so I think a lot of people don't like to kind of admit when they're wrong. And I kind of love it because I'm like, I'm wrong all the time. Like I don't have the right information all the time. Like I have to, when I have better information, I make better choices.
Mhm. Absolutely. Okay, so I always love a good fashion love story. Do you have a
Okay.
fa Do you have a favorite piece in your closet? What is it, and what do you love about it?
Oh, do I have a favorite piece in my closet? Okay. So I won't say Bubuleh because that's too, corny to talk about my own clothes that I wear. So I want to talk about my favorite piece. So I have okay. There's this one jacket I have from the 70s that I bought. There's a really high-end thrift shop in San Francisco in the Castro by where I used to live. And I used to be in media. I used to be a director of marketing in LGBT media and had a lot of events to go to. So always, was shopping a lot. And I got really into secondhand kind of like stuff there because was trying to be, more eco-friendly. And I once saw the most gorgeous jacket, like this black and white, like checkered jacket, like so gorgeous, perfect fit. Like inside, it has this like Art Deco lining, like so beautiful. Have never spent so much on a jacket, and I like literally wear it everywhere I can. Like I'm so obsessed with it. Like, and I during COVID, like I kind of outgrew it because like I definitely did the COVID-15, and I took it out. I was like, I'm not never getting rid of this jacket. Like I will alter this jacket as much as I need to, as many times as I need to. If I gain weight or lose weight, like we'll never get rid of this. So that 70s jacket I probably love. And there's a lot of like kind of I also when I bought that I got this matching like 70s Hermes scarf that I really love. I'm really into like small accessories like scarves. I have my ear gauged and I like to have different things. Um but like really into scarves and gauges specifically. Um and yeah, I have some really, ones I love in my closet. Yeah, there's a lot of things I love in my closet. It's I recently was cleaning out, like doing the whole, does this spark joy? Do I wear this? Thing. I was like, I can't get rid of this. It brings me so much joy. Like everything in my closet.
But that's how it should be, right? We should love everything in our closet.
Yeah.
If the things that we surround us with don't make us happy, we should get rid of them. Unless it's something you need. It's funny. I remember when that whole spark joy thing started, and I was like, "Oh, these yoga pants don't spark joy, but I need them for yoga
Yeah.
class, so I'm
Yeah.
gonna I'm gonna just keep wearing
Yeah.
them until I wear them out." But so
Yeah.
just using your own kind of intuition on where you're gonna purge or not. But I think
Yeah.
that we should love the things that we have. They should make us feel good when we wear them.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I mean, life's
I have
short.
them.
Like,
Yeah.
enjoy it.
One thing I realized post COVID is I had a lot of things in my closet when I did a recent purge that actually made me feel really bad because, like a lot of people, and I just said like kind of briefly, like, I did the COVID-15 thing and gained, weight and, just like a different body size than I was, 5 years ago. Right. Which has been a little bit of a struggle for me. And so I've kept things in my closet that I'm like, oh, when I lose 15 pounds again, like when I go back to 15 pounds later, 10 pounds later, like I'll wear these. And I realized I had a lot of things in my closet that were like what ifs, or like when I blank, I can wear this. That would
Hmm.
just like actually make me feel bad versus just getting clothes that fit me the way I am now, and not like having things in my closet that are for a different person. Right. And like I know a lot of people have done that too. They have sections of their closet or things where they're like, oh yeah, no, I just have to like, lose 10 pounds and then I can wear these things that I love. And it's like, well, if you have things in your, clothes that are conditional upon like, your body size or whatever, like it actually can, and you look at it every day, right? Like you look at your closet every day, that can have like a really negative impact on your mental health. And so a lot of the recent purge wasn't things I necessarily didn't like. It was just more like, look, yeah, I can shop again if I am at a different size, but I'm not going to keep things just if I tell myself that when I, am this size or whatever, then I can wear them. Like it's just not worth it.
I agree. I think, we say all the time, if it doesn't fit, swap it. It's
Oh, I
like,
love that. Yeah.
if you don't love it, swap it. If you never wear it, swap it. If it doesn't fit, swap it. But I think with something like that really special jacket, that's an exception, right? I think that there
Mm,
can be
mhm.
those pieces that are really unique or really special that you feel like, oh, I just love it so much. And either you get it altered or you maybe keep one or two things. But yeah, having a closet full of things that you can't wear.
It's like
Um,
it just constantly tells you what you can't do, what you don't look like, right? What you want, but you're not, right? Like it tells you to be somebody else. And I think that I have been having conversations with friends a lot that, and we talked about this a little earlier, which is like the things we wear represent our values, the things we have represent our values. They say things about ourselves. And when we're looking at our clothes every day and deciding what to wear as something very physical we interact with every day, like we get messages from that, right? Like we're telling ourselves something about ourselves, about where we are, about what we care about. And if I'm looking every day at things I can't wear because I'm not skinny enough anymore, like that's sending a message to me that I am starting to reject more, and just saying like, yeah, if it doesn't fit, swap it, sell it, donate it. In your case, swap it, right?
yeah.
And so like I did a lot of donations this past year because I was like, but it doesn't make sense for me to have right now.
Hmm. So what's inspiring you right now?
Oh, what's inspiring me right now? That's a good question. I'm really into like, fall is like kind of my favorite season. I haven't been in fall in a while because have been in California for like the past 5 years. But I'm here for a few months, and kind of the cozy sweater fall, sort of fireplace vibes. There's, I'm so going to say this wrong, but is it like Huga? Am I saying it right? Do you know
Oh,
what
I think it's Is it Higgy or
Higgy?
Hygge? Oh, yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah.
I've heard it so many ways, and I like it's embarrassing that I don't know how to pronounce it still. Like
Me
it's like
either.
Hyegge. Like I just don't know. But that kind of like Finnish style of warmth, comfort style, that aesthetic I'm really into right now. Also aesthetically, I've been really into knits recently and been starting to do some knits. So today actually we came out with our first crochet accessories. They're like these cotton crochet coffee slips that like instead of having, when you get coffee at like Dunkin' or Starbucks and getting the disposable, covers if it's hot, like something you can bring with you to not use as much, right? Like even though it's cardboard, but still like try to reduce your waste as much as possible.
Yeah.
Um, so like I've been looking at knits. I just produced some actually baby samples that are like knit sweaters, knit cardigans, and I'm looking at for fall expanding our knits because it to me it's like very retro, very kind of grandma-ish, very evergreen, right? Like I don't think they go out of style. A beautiful knit cardigan, a beautiful knit sweater.
Never. Yeah.
And I love things that just don't go out of style. Or if they have been out of style, everything old becomes new again. So like, which is very much a part of the brand. So knits are definitely like something I'm really inspired by right now. I'm also like like continually inspired by certain people. And so I've been working on some collections that are very far from fruition. Like they're not close, but like I have a collection I've been working on for a while and just designing and sketching and sampling that's like inspired by Ruth Bader Ginsburg, which is like her style, I think was iconic. Like people just think, the necklace here, right? You see that all the time
Hmm.
with Ruth Bader Ginsburg. If you look at her like outfits throughout her career, like they say so much about her values, like things I resonate with. And so I've been doing like kind of some patchwork samples around like different kind of patterns that she wore that I want to do in
Mm.
like jackets or shirts. And I'm also looking at like, similar people like Joan Rivers that I'm so inspired by, right? Like I'm really inspired by certain individuals and people that, share similar values. So those are a couple examples, knits. Um, one thing I talked about in a recent interview is I think something that I really love that I kind of hope comes back is like brooches. I just love, and like I'm starting to kind of learn about like how to make them because I'm just like I think about like when my grandma would wear out the sweater and it's always like a handmade brooch or like something like that, and it's not something you see really anymore as
Mhm.
much. And I'm like, ooh, like what's a cool way to bring that back? Like that's such a cool like little accent piece. Like I'm really inspired by brooches right now. And just generally right now we're in this age of like kind of the coastal grandma moment, which has been something we hear a lot. And I'm like very much kind of, a lot of the things in that kind of moment, that aesthetic are things I'm very much inspired by right now. Um, Another thing I guess I'll like say, and this is it maybe even more important than those, is I don't like to make pieces that are kind of time related because I like things to be evergreen, not something you wear for a month, like when it's Halloween and then you get rid of, right? So, that's part of the sustainability aspect of the business and slow fashion, not just like churning things out when it's relevant. But I have been like increasingly, aware of and conscious of like what we can do through clothing to kind of address kind of the issues that we're seeing, anti-Semitism, among other issues. Like I was going to do a collection for Roe v. Wade, right? Like, and I was like, how do I do this? Can I do this, consciously, not just throwing things out there with messaging? Because after those decisions, you see tons of shirts and brands coming out with shirts that like for like $10 that are like, with a message, and they kind of go to waste. But I'm like thinking about, how can I use clothing to talk about current events in a way that's evergreen too? Um,
Mhm.
so a lot of times in our messaging and like our social posts, we'll talk about what's going on, but not put it on our clothing. But I am thinking more about, how do we dress it through clothing and actually like weave it into the clothing in a way
Mhm.
that's not just capitalizing on a moment or taking advantage of a moment, but something that's talking about a moment that is equally relevant if you wore it in 3 years. Um,
Mhm.
and so that's something that is definitely, I don't, inspiration feels like the wrong thing to say there because the inspiration sounds positive and it's almost like not positive to, have to create clothing in response to things that we're not happy about or that aren't right. Um, but it's something that is driving a lot of my kind of creative mindset right now and thinking about
Mhm. Very cool. And in this time of climate anxiety, what's keeping you feeling optimistic about the future?
that. Ooh, good question. I love that. I'm like, very good question. Personally, something that makes me feel optimistic is that the rates of people who are eating plant-based and vegan is like drastically going up, like continually. So where it was 10 years ago and the options we had 10 years ago versus what we have now, and like in so many fast food places and stuff, you can choose a veggie burger or a burger. Like it's never been easier to make choices that are plant based and that are
Mhm.
more helpful to the environment. And people are really responding well to that, right? Like Kim Kardashian is Beyond Meat's new ambassador. Like 10 years ago, like what? Like as someone of that caliber being a representative for an alternative meat company, like I don't think would have happened. So seeing kind of the public response to plant-based options and people's willingness to adopt them, I think is something that I'm excited about. I
Mhm.
also have this is still more in the food domain than the fashion domain, but I think that in terms of both the food we eat and what we wear, there's a lot of opportunity that I'm optimistic about synthetic materials, synthetic meats. So like there's pineapple leather, mushroom leather, recycled types of things, and then that also comes to food like it's like I don't know much about it, but like the genetically grown food movement is going to be big, right? Where it's like I
Mhm.
could eat meat, but nothing dies for the meat. Like it doesn't use the land. Like I'm not 100% sure about it because it's so new. But there's all these opportunities and alternatives to things that are really bad for the environment, and I'm pretty optimistic about that. Um, and I'm glad you asked that because I think like I'm curious if you feel the same of like you're doing something about the environment, right? About about waste, right? Because you're
Mhm.
pop society, right? You're doing it.
Right.
And sometimes it feels like we're going in this really positive direction. And then everybody's like on board with like, yeah, we're all on board with like, let's care about the environment and make choices that are better for the environment. And then you see like stats like, a couple of months ago you saw, Shane is the fastest growing retailer in the world. And you're like, well, clearly we're not all on the same page if that's the fastest growing retailer and clothing brand in the world, because you're like millions and millions of people are buying from them constantly. So like clearly like what we're saying and what we're doing are not matching. And so I feel like sometimes it can be really disheartening and I focus on the negative of like, oh, I thought going in the right direction and maybe we're not. And so I really like that you asked, what are you positive about? Because there really is a lot to be positive about.
Mhm.
It's, I think sometimes I find myself being a little bit, I'm not addicted to negativity, but so used to it that I almost see, like, we've been surrounded by so much negativity the past few years that it almost seems like it's easier to spot the negative parts of something than the positive parts of something sometimes.
Mhm.
I like, and so I'm grateful that you asked that question because it's a really good opportunity for me to also realize that there's a lot of positive movement in the right direction. I know it's like you're interviewing me, but I'd actually love to hear like, do you have something you're most positive about? Because I'm just very curious to know like what
Yeah.
stands out to you as something that you're most positive about.
Well, one of the reasons I started this podcast actually was I have been struggling with a lot of climate anxiety or just like
Yeah,
bad stuff going on in the world anxiety, but particularly
yeah,
about the climate. You have so many scientists that are literally, sounding the alarm in any and every way that they can to try to tell people like we're in this moment and
yeah,
we've already done some irreversible damage. We
yeah,
need to change the way that we're living on this earth. If we're going to survive as a species. I mean, it's like so I think about this like massive problem that
yeah,
humanity is facing, and one
yeah,
of the things that really helps me stay positive is talking with people like you and people that are working on solutions, people that are thinking about sustainability. Just knowing that I'm not alone,
yeah,
that
yeah,
we're not alone, that there are people that are taking steps to try to step more lightly on the earth, that are trying to encourage other people to do the same.
yeah,
And it can feel like we're climbing this like insurmountable mountain. Like you said,
yeah,
Shein is exploding and it's like, wait, I thought fast fashion was on a
yeah. I thought we were
downturn.
done
Like
with that.
what's happening?
Yeah,
But the more and more that we connect with one another and that we build community and that we realize that we're actually not doing this alone and
mhm,
that there are people that are making steps to try to make a positive impact. That's what keeps me feeling optimistic. Um, and
awesome.
so, every time I do an interview, for example, I feel really good by the end of it. And that's why I always end with that question because, I know we talk about a lot of kind of dark, difficult topics on some of these episodes too. And it's like, well, all right, let's bring it back up. Like I want people to
Yeah,
walk away
yeah,
feeling positive.
for sure.
But yeah, for me, just to kind of summarize my answer to your question, just knowing that there are a lot of people that are
Yeah,
doing things to try to make the world better and to try to tackle these problems,
yeah,
and I just want to highlight that as much as I can.
yeah.
It gives me a little boost every time I do it.
I
So.
love that. And it's like, it makes me feel so positive that someone, that this is, someone doing something to kind of help the environment or mitigate harm to the environment is even, worthy of being heard, right? Of someone wanting to even speak to me, because that's something that, I think even a few years ago, 10, 15 years ago, it would be like maybe not super relevant for most people, or maybe people wouldn't be interested, or it wouldn't be something that someone would want to talk to you about. Now, like,
Mhm.
oh, this is something that other people also care about, like, is a very positive thing to see. And it's just like very cool that people want to hear about it. Like, that there's definitely a growing community of people who are finding like positivity
Mhm.
and building something together, and like realizing we're not alone in fighting climate change and fighting a lot of the environmental destruction we see in fast fashion, even though it seems insurmountable. But it's only insurmountable if you're doing it as one person. If you're doing it
Mhm.
as a group of people, or you realize like, okay, you're all doing different parts, like you realize, okay, like this is something that we could accomplish. We just like, we need to keep going, we need to keep focusing on the positive. Because when a lot of times we tell ourselves, or when I tell myself, like, this is something I can't fix, it just feels insurmountable. That's the quickest way to not fix something, is when you
Mhm.
tell yourself you can't fix it, right? Because then you're like, you
Yeah.
already give up. But when you are talking with people and you're realizing like, oh, like you get kind of optimistic about like, oh, doing this together, we could actually make some positive change. Um, it's way more realistic that we can actually put a dent or fix these problems. So it's really cool to be able to have these conversations and know there's a community of people who really care about this.
Yeah, and we're kind of finding our people, right? And the more that we come together, the more we can effectuate change. So I just think
Yeah.
it's, just trying to, power in numbers.
Power in numbers. Yeah. Power in numbers.
Before we go, how can people find you?
Yeah. So people can find us. Our site is bubuleh.com, Bubuleh, or they can find us at Shop Bubuleh on Instagram or TikTok. We just made a TikTok recently, doing what these young people are doing. I'm like, I'm still learning it, but like we're doing TikTok now. And those are probably the best two places to kind of find us. People can shop right on Facebook, Instagram, or our website. And like you mentioned earlier, 18% of our revenue for the next through the end of the year is being matched for the ADL, just given current events. Um, and also my personal email, I think, is on our website too. So people can always reach out to me if they have questions about the brand, suggestions for the brand. I always say for Bubuleh, like it takes a village. It's a very like kind of Jewish thing to say, like it takes a village, and it's like very corny and tacky, but I think it's true. And also like, goes to what we were just talking about. So I have I think a section on our site that's like, if you have thoughts, suggestion, feedback, like ideas, reach out to me because there's plenty of things that we could do better, we could change, we could start doing, stop doing. And I love hearing from people with different types of expertise or ideas, and what they think, about the bubble and where we can go. So yeah, that's, they can reach us there on on our website.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for taking time to talk with me today. It's been such a pleasure to meet you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I loved having this conversation with you, and I love what you're doing, like Swap Society. I
Thank
absolutely
you.
love it. Already sent to my sister, who's like, who I'm sure already actually knows about Swap Society. Like she probably does already because that's like her thing. But I was like, I'm on this, podcast for Swap Society. If you don't know them, you like you need to be doing it. So like love what you all are doing, and
Thank
I
you.
appreciate you having me so much.
Well, have a beautiful day.
You too.
Thank you for listening to the Swap Society podcast. Swap Society is an online clothing swap for women and kids that makes it easy and affordable to mix up your wardrobe sustainably. We're a growing community of women across the USA who are creating positive change by swapping our clothes and slowing down our fashion consumption. We would love to swap with you. If you're interested in joining, you can sign up at our website. Learn more at www.swapsociety.co. That's swapsociety.co. You can find the show notes for each episode on our website. Please get in touch with us on social media too. We're on Instagram, TikTok, Pinterest, and YouTube for the video version of this podcast at Swap Society. Music is by Joel Korolitz and yours truly. I hope you've enjoyed the show. Please help us spread the word by subscribing, leaving a rating and review, sharing on social media, or simply telling a friend. We really appreciate your support. Have a wonderful day, and remember to swap before you shop.